We are joined by Brad Denny. He is the host of the Speak of the Devils podcast and has been around this Arizona State program. Arizona State and Mississippi State coming up this Saturday night from the Valley of the Sun in Tempe, Arizona. Brad, really appreciate a few minutes of your time this afternoon.
Of course, always happy to talk some football.
No doubt, and it is here, and it is fun. What an entertaining start to the year, and I would think what an entertaining start to the season for Arizona State, for Sun Devil fans who had to deal with the frustration of a not great season ago, 3-9. I mean, less than a minute in, a pick six. Did the place just explode, or was it relief? What was it like right out of the gate?
Yeah, there was probably a good sense of relief because, it's been a rough couple of years here for the Sun Devil football program. Of course, the end of the Herm Edwards era was a kind of an abject disaster. The NCAA investigation, the problems with the athletic department, athletic director. But there was a new AD that was put in place earlier this year. There's a lot of kind of enthusiasm. There's a lot of hope that ASU went out in this offseason and bolstered a lot of key areas, brought in some talent, some depth. And then to have a beginning of a game like that where they get the pick six on the second play and then rolling on to a big win over a pretty quality group of five team was really kind of just, as you said, kind of a sense of relief, but also maybe a little bit of much-needed hope after a couple of pretty dark years out here in Tempe.
Yeah, I certainly can understand that. I got a big-picture question before we kind of drill down onto Kenny Dillingham and this team and this game coming up. I've been to the Phoenix, Scottsdale, Tempe, Arizona a few times, and I always walk away from there and, I've been on Arizona State's campus, and I always walk away going, I feel like they should win more. Like, this feels like a place that is, clearly it's easy to attract students because there are about 1 million of them, and everybody seems to have a good time. It feels like a place that you ought to be able to draw high-level athletes to come in and not deal with the cold and all that stuff. Why kind of across the board has it not been better?
It's kind of funny that you mentioned that because it's been a running gag, joke, tragedy out here for about the last several decades that ASU has been called, a sleeping giant because of everything you mentioned. It's in the heart of Phoenix, just 10, 15 minutes away, one of the top 5 biggest cities in the country. There's everything to do here for 7 months out of the year. The weather's great. We pay our price in the summer, of course, but all the things are really in place for Arizona State athletics to be just a kind of a titan, especially in the revenue generation sports, but just outside of a few seasons here and there, it just has not been able to really kind of fall into place. Now, ultimately, I think that falls back on a history of just kind of, questionable leadership, some questionable decisions from the administration at various points throughout the years that have really kind of held these athletic programs back. And so that's going back to the kind of the change at athletic director that was made late last year, and then a new one was installed in Graham Rossini earlier this year. He's an ASU alum, and as somebody who has deep ties to the region, kind of understands that, here in the Valley, that, especially from an athletics perspective, this city will get behind a winner, but if you're not winning, there's a lot of other things to do so that, people's attention, entertainment dollar will go elsewhere. So he's really, I think, dialed in. There's some early indications that, this might be somebody who gets it, who can maybe put the things in place, especially in the changing landscape of college football and college athletics in general, to maybe get Arizona State on more stable footing and maybe, poke and prod that sleeping giant and get him to maybe wake up a little bit.
And Brad, just to be clear, I didn't mean that as a shot. I meant it more as a compliment and genuine curiosity. That was not taking a shot at ASU. I was just kind of like, this is a place that people should want to come that compete well at athletics. So good to hear. Good to hear that it's moving in that direction.
Brad, when you look at this game on Saturday, I went back and took a look at Arizona State, watched the highlights. The box score is kind of interesting. 500 yards of total offense, and it's almost split right down the middle. Were you more impressed with what Arizona State did on the ground or with Sam Levitt and what he was able to do in the passing game?
Really kind of the ground game was what we expected. This is a very deep and talented group of running backs. We thought that this was going to be a team that's going to lean heavily on the run, and that's really kind of what they did, and they were able to kind of utilize that depth at running back with Cameron Scadaboo, Carlos Brooks, who is now healthy. He was a difference maker a year ago when he was in the lineup. You had a guy like Tyson Brown, who's coming into a sophomore season. They didn't even play Raleek Brown, a USC transfer, a former 5-star recruit, who looks like he's going to be good to go for this week. But really kind of all eyes were on quarterback Sam Levitt making his first career start, and he was brought in to kind of push Jaden Rashada, and ultimately was so good in spring he pushed Jaden Rashada out the door. And so he earned the trust of the staff. But, of course, as a redshirt freshman making his first college start, a lot of eyes and a lot of questions. But I was really impressed, honestly, with his poise. And he did not really make a whole lot of mistakes that you see freshmen or redshirt freshmen make. The offensive line did have some issues at tackle, but I thought he showed some good pocket presence, has some really good mobility, and I think maybe surprised the Wyoming defense in terms of what he was able to do in terms of scrambling around and picking up some big yards. But he also is a guy that likes to attack downfield, and I thought overall, there were some mistakes that, and misfires that were kind of maybe typical of a first career start, maybe some jitters early on. But overall, I was really surprised in a pleasant way to see what he was able to do in that first start, and he wasn't asked to do too much, of course, with the team jumping out to a big lead. But I think along with the run game is what we thought it was. But if Sam Levitt can show this kind of consistency and that kind of that poise week in and week out, this could be an ASU offense that maybe surpasses expectations this year.
Visiting with Brad Denny, talking Arizona State, as the Mississippi State Bulldogs will head west for a game this coming Saturday night. If you're a Bulldogs fan and want to kind of figure out what you need to know about Arizona State, check out Brad's podcast, Speak of the Devils. Speak of the Devils podcast, available wherever
Might hear a familiar voice on that podcast, Brad. You never know.
Yeah, it's great stuff there on this new episode that just dropped.
Good news is it's got that button where you can fast forward through certain parts of it. You can get past that if you want to do it. Brad, what about Kenny Dillingham? Still very young, but he strikes me as a likable guy, maybe excitable, feels like he's doing everything he can to convince fans to jump on board, not to necessarily wait for results, but to be part of the build. How are people responding to Kenny Dillingham, and what do you see from him as a young coach?
Overall, he's been pretty impressive. Now, he came into a situation that was really, really rough. Herm Edwards and staff, the prior athletic director, the NCAA investigation, all these factors really put Kenny in a real tough spot last year, kind of a year zero to kind of start, but then they had some pretty unprecedented injuries. 10 of their top 11 offensive linemen missed significant time last year. They had to start 5 different guys at quarterback. So on top of being a first-time head coach and inheriting a program with all these kind of institutional issues, he had that thrown into him. But he really impressed a lot of folks inside and outside of that football building with just kind of the maturity and the level-headed approach that he had, and he was been pretty transparent about that these first couple of years are really kind of just about getting better, improving the process, laying a foundation, and instilling a culture. And so I think that he's really kind of earned a lot of goodwill. Now, like the new athletic director, Graham Rossini, Kenny's also an ASU alum, and he was on Todd Graham's staff back in 2014, 2015. And he has a little bit of Todd Graham in him in terms of the kind of very disciplined and attention to detail, but doesn't necessarily have some of the Todd Graham failings in terms of being maybe too much of a disciplinarian. He's kind of that I think he's at least so far has found a good balance between disciplinarian and players coach, and the players, and talking to them the last couple of seasons, have really seemed to buy into that approach of hard work, but also having a nice an atmosphere around this program that really allows them to be themselves, and translates well on the field. So ultimately he's just won 4 games so far, but the trend line, at least in terms of the view of the fan base, especially coming off that win, seems to be up, and he probably has a little bit more slack in terms of the overall rebuild than maybe just a typical coach coming into a situation like this.
I don't believe in forever with coaches. I don't believe in, you've got to be a fill-in-the-blank guy, an Arizona State guy to be the head coach at Arizona State. He happens to be that. There are no guarantees in coaching, but is this one of those deals where it feels like if things go well, Kenny Dillingham maybe will be at his alma mater for a while?
I think so. And, we've heard that from so many coaches over the years that, this
Sure.
is my dream job. But And the last couple, Ty Graham said that as well when he came to Arizona State. But you kind of get a sense that Kenny has been such a straight shooter, and everybody that I've talked to, behind the scenes, well, it's like what you see out there in public is exactly the same thing you get behind the scenes. And with he's a Valley guy, he's an Arizona State alum, and so this just, I think, means more to him than perhaps just another coach maybe taking a first-time job. So, granted, he's got a lot of work ahead of him to get this program to be competitive in a pretty tough Big 12 conference. But I think what we've seen early on, the way he's wired, I mean, he's definitely one of those guys that understands modern college football, the way college athletics is going, and we've seen some prominent coaches across the country maybe have a little problem in terms of in the NIL transfer portal era. Kenny, I think, really has shown that he thrives on that type of stuff, and he maybe is one of those guys that maybe is more about the process perhaps than the end result, because he just really loves the detail. And so I think those are some traits that could equip him to be here for the long haul.